Today's scripture reading is from Amos chapter 7, verses 7 through 17. This is what the Lord showed me. The Lord was standing by a wall with a plumb line in his hand. The Lord said to me, Amos, what do you see? A plumb line, I said. Then the Lord said, See, I am setting a plumb line in the middle of my people Israel. I will never again forgive them. The shrines of Isaac will be made desolate, and the holy places of Israel will be laid waste, and I will rise against the house of Jeroboam with the sword. Then Amaziah, the priest of Bethel, reported to Israel's king Jeroboam, Amos has plotted against you within the house of Israel. The land isn't able to cope with everything that he is saying. Amos has said Jeroboam will die by the sword, and Israel will be forced out of its land. Amaziah said to Amos, You who see things, go, run away to the land of Judah. Eat your bread there, and prophesy there. But never again prophesy at Bethel, for it is the king's holy place and his royal house. Amos answered Amaziah, I am not a prophet, nor am I a prophet's son, but I am a shepherd and a trimmer of sycamore trees. But the Lord took me from shepherding the flock, and the Lord said to me, Go, prophesy to my people Israel. Now then, hear the Lord's word. You say, Don't prophesy against Israel, and don't preach against the house of Isaac. Therefore the Lord proclaims, Your wife will become a prostitute in the city, and your sons and your daughters will fall by the sword, and your land will be measured and divided up. You yourself will die in an unclean land, and Israel will surely be taken away from its land. The word of the Lord.
Been over a year now since I became a homeowner again. And you find tools like your level useful when you become a homeowner again. And one of the things that I remember that we were looking for and hoping we would be able to get was a garage. And fortunately we found a home that we enjoy very much, and it does have a garage in the back. And I have, in the meantime, managed to become those people I always used to snicker at, you know, the ones who have garages but don't have cars in them because they're full of all your other stuff. My garage is the place where I keep my tools and my yard tools and a bunch of wood that I keep swearing I'm going to use for projects at some point and never get around to using, and all these other things now. I have a garage, no car in it. But I also have a garage that has an interesting defect. When you use your upright level, and you go into my garage, you can't see it from the outside, but if you go onto the inside, it's not finished anyway, you can see the studs, and you'll notice that as you get closer to the front garage door, they start to do this. It's not coming down. I don't think it's coming down anytime soon, but it's not exactly right, is it? And the funny thing is, you can look at it. If you look down at the cement, you can see that this garage originally was a little shorter. It had been added onto because there's new cement that's been laid, and you can see the difference in the construction too. When the original garage was built, a 2x4 meant that your lumber was 2 inches by 4 inches. When the addition was built, I know whatever it is, it's not 2 inches by 4 inches. And so now, although it doesn't show it badly, if you look closely, you can begin to see where the garage is starting to tilt just a little bit toward the front. It's got a bit of a lean heading west. That's obviously going to have to be taken care of some point, isn't it? And I go on down the list. Well, we bought a house that had been reshingled recently with nice long-lasting shingles. We should be in good shape for the roof over the house. I can't say the same about the shingles on the garage. Whereas they did a good job of removing the moss and taking care of the roof over the house, it's as if they never paid a second glance at the roof on the garage. The shingles are aged, they've been there for a while. I get really irritated in the back where I have my compost pile next to the garage because I keep pulling out little bits and pieces of that old composite shingle that somehow end up in my compost pile. And I didn't put them there. And I'm pretty sure the squirrels, all the things they carry around in my backyard, I don't think they're carrying that. So you get these little bits and pieces that are slowly coming off my roof. And one day I happened to be in there working before I had cluttered it as badly as I have now. And I was working in there and the rains began to fall. And all of a sudden I had this feeling of, what was that? And then it hit me. I look up. Oh, yeah. We're starting to get those little holes and those crevices and the places where the shingles have worn away or where the moss has started to push them away. And, oh, well, maybe it's good that I don't keep the car in the garage after all. But it needs some work. And at some point I'm going to get somebody who knows more about engineering and structure to come over and take a look at it and tell me. Is my garage at that place where, well, can we come in? Can we prop it up? Can we redo those supports maybe at the front end and take that turn and get it back to square again? We'll worry about the roof next. But can we save the walls and the structures? And then we'll worry about the rest of it. Or is it at that point where it's just going to have to come down and start over again? I don't think it is. But then what do I know? I'm up here preaching because I'm not a civil engineer. So maybe it'll be worse than I thought. Maybe it won't be so bad at all. Maybe we'll be able to fix it in a day. I don't know until I try. I just know that when I put what I pass off for a plumb line in my garage, the line doesn't go as straight as I would like it to. It's kind of what made today's scripture reading interesting to me. As God presents this image of a plumb line hanging across a wall. And we know that the line is designed to hang and to show an image of a line that is straight up and down relative to the earth, that gravity pulls that heavy weight down, and from wherever you attach the line, it will give you the exact straight line. And we know that the plumb line in early construction was used before we had water levels, before we had our fancy equipment and our bubbles. We would use plumb lines to build things and to square them up. So it's fascinating to me that in this image that God is sharing with Amos and through Amos, he sets a plumb line against the wall, but it's not to make the wall straight. It's to use it as a tool of destruction. He's saying, I'm going to set a line amongst my people, and I'm going to tear away half. The only reason a tool like this should be used for destruction is if it tells you that your garage is too far gone, and that means it's time to come in and to tear it down. But in this image, that's not what God is doing at all. He's using it as a divider. He's making an indication that half of the people in the land have wandered away from the laws that God has laid before him, that have come and brought new gods and placed new idols in places of worship, that they are doing a different thing. And he says, I will take that half and I will wipe it away. And I thought about that and I went, well, that is one way to destroy your wall, isn't it? If you set your plumb line and tear out half, there's a pretty good chance the other half is going to come down with it. In spite of whatever good may be left in the land, whatever may be left on the side of that line that God has judged righteous and upright, to be still adhering to the laws that he has shared through Moses and the prophets, he's willing to tear away the other half, knowing that the whole structure will probably inevitably come crashing down with it. You know, the funny thing is that this is a tool that has a great amount of history for us as Christians. In fact, if you were to travel to some of the older cathedrals in Europe, the places we built before we had these great modern engineering tools that we use now, one of the way they would build the high domed arches is they would use their plumb lines to make sure they were engineering and building these domes straight. In fact, there are these grand cathedrals that you can go into, and if you look hard enough, you can find in the floor a brass plate. And that brass plate is the center over which the plumb line was to hang and align so that during construction they knew they were making their arches and they were building these domed edifices straight and level so that they would stand. I thought that was a fascinating image, to think that the plumb line has been kind of a marker of building an upright church, of designing a structure that won't fall and fail, but that will stand the test of time. But we know it also could then be returned after the earth is settled and shifted, after the foundations maybe have moved underneath the church. You could return that plumb bob to the center of the cathedral and see, does it still align over that center plate or not? Has the world shifted around us in such a way that we're falling out of alignment and that we risk the whole structure coming down on us? Excuse me. I've only been battling this cold for about 3 weeks, and I've done really great until right now. I don't know about images of death and destruction. I'm not really comfortable with them. And I got the impression you all weren't either. Jeremy read those words and he nailed them. He gave us exactly what we needed to hear, and it ended on such a terrible note. And then we flashed the screen up where he says, the word of the Lord. And I heard a wee bit of tentativeness from you all in saying, thanks be to God. We didn't want to be quite that obvious, but it sounds like some of you were as uncomfortable with these words as I was. And I chose them not because I'd found them easy to preach or because I wanted to make you uncomfortable or because I like to preach when I'm uncomfortable, but I chose them because the Bible is full of these uncomfortable moments and these reminders that sometimes the world shifts around us. And God is calling us into alignment with that which is faithful. God is reminding us that we have to adjust when the foundations change. We have to make sure that our structures will stand in spite of those shifting and those changes. We need to remain true, to remain upright to the laws that God has set before us. And in a way, that is exactly what God was telling Israel through Amos. The people were forgetting their call. It was never just to themselves alone, it was to the people around them. It was never to become wealthy upon their wildest dreams, but not take care of their neighbors who remained in need. Or to put other idols before their God, to worship those gods which would justify their own needs, their own greeds, their own desires, to not follow the commands that God had put before them. In many ways, what we see in Amos, what we see so many times in so many of the prophets throughout the Hebrew Bible, is that the foundation is shifted and the house of Israel is no longer straight and true. They haven't made the needed adjustments to ensure that they can stand upright and faithful before God and still be the house that shelters and guards and protects their neighbors, those that God has called them to look out for. The widows, the orphans, the impoverished, the immigrant, the hungry, the homeless, those imprisoned. Every time they step away, we find somebody like Amos being called to rise up and remind them that the house of Israel no longer stands true, and they're going to need to get it right. Because not unlike my garage, they can't stand forever if they don't stand true before God. The plumb bob continues to swing. May we find the ways that we can continue to be upright and upstanding before God by grounding ourselves in faith to God's call to care for one another, to love God, to love ourselves, and to love our world. Amen.